Okay, right, and welcome back to another lesson on slavery, this time answering the question, to what extent was the British Empire built on slavery? So what I'd like you to do is make sure you've got a pen and a second colour pen, probably a green pen. You should have that because you should have your pencil case with you. And you should get some paper, preferably lined paper or something to make some notes on. So it could be a laptop, but you're probably using a laptop. So I'd advise getting a pen and paper. Okay, now you're back. What I'm going to do a few times is this lesson, I'll probably tell you to pause it a couple of times to give yourself a chance to actually answer the question, because otherwise I'll just be stood here for a couple of minutes waiting for you, or sat here. So when I tell you pause it, do pause it, just give yourself a chance to actually do the activity. Also, if I ask a question and you want to go back to it to give yourself more time, please do. It's a video, it's a recording. You do what you need to do. Okay, so as always, we start a lesson with some recall, because obviously we don't just learn it once, otherwise we will forget it. We need to keep going over it, and that's why revision is necessary all the time. Try and revise. So here are 5 questions. I would like you to answer those. Pause it to give yourself a chance. You'll probably need about 5.5 minutes for this. Off you go. Okay, well, hopefully we're welcoming you back now. So here are the questions. I'll just move my head there. So slavery, the definition of slavery that we're using is when one person owns another and controls them. Definition of a colony is a country or area controlled and immigrated to by another country. So if the British Empire controls Sierra Leone or India, India is the colony because it is controlled by the empire and people move to it from Britain. What is a plantation? This is a large farm where slaves worked and lived, and the goods created were cotton, sugar, and tobacco, and they're really important because they make a huge amount of money for Britain. We'll look at that today. Give a list of those who benefited from slavery. This is looking at your last red zone. It could be investors, it could be slave ship owners, it could be slavers, it could be traders, it could be the government through tax, it could be factory owners who gain cheap cotton and use it to make clothes. It could be the people buying the clothes because they now have cheaper goods. These are all groups that are benefiting from slavery, and we need to know this because we need to know how Britain benefits, because then we can understand the situation that we're in today. Because now with Black Lives Matter and Black History Month, people are often talking about we need to learn more about people's history. Well, this is partly what we need to. We need to know how Britain becomes the country that it is today, because Britain is about 5th or 6th world's biggest economy. We're only a small country. And one reason why is because we made a huge amount of money from something called the Industrial Revolution, which we're going to look at later in year 8. And that benefits from slavery. A huge amount of money is made from slavery, which then can be invested or used to spend on things for the Industrial Revolution. So we're going to continue looking at to what extent was the British Empire built on slavery. Remember, we've already done African society, so we've looked at what it was like, so we can compare it to see what damage we actually do, or Europeans do. I didn't do any damage, I didn't do it. And we need to know the reasons for empire, because if we can understand why people create an empire, or we can understand why then they have slavery, because it was similar, we can compare and contrast the reasons. Okay. And as I've said, we're going to look at the Industrial Revolution as well later, and we're going to see what effect slavery actually had on Africa. So we're going to be looking at how the British Empire, all the countries in red are controlled by Britain. All the countries apart from this one here are colonies. We're going to look at how they're actually controlled, or how Britain benefits from slavery. All right, so first off, I think we need to look at what the trade was like in Britain before slavery. Okay, so in the 1600s, the main exports, an export is an item sent out of a country. So if I send shoes to someone in France to sell, I've exported those shoes. So mainly we exported things like wool, which we got from sheep. Okay, that was about 90% of our exports, which amounted to about £6.5 million, a huge amount of money, huge amount of money. But then that started to decrease into the 1700s, and it only accounted for 47% of the total. So what we need to look at is what that other 53% was. Now, as I've said, we benefit from slavery, and a lot of those goods came from slavery. So we started getting cotton, sugar, and tobacco from places. Where were cotton, sugar, and tobacco actually made? Have a think about answering that question, please. You could write it down or just think it in your head. Well, they were created in slavery on plantations. So they were made very, very cheap because we weren't paying people because of slavery. And in the 1600s, we had almost none of it because we couldn't make it in Britain. It's not hot enough for cotton, sugar, or tobacco. It's just not. But 1700s, when we start increasing our amount of slavery, it actually goes from nothing to about 30% of the total. So this change in trade shows how we benefit from slavery, because those goods, cotton, sugar, and tobacco, were made very cheaply, but sold at a really, really high price. So for instance, sugar was very expensive. Only the richest could have that at one point. So what I'd like you to do now, I'm just going to move my face, is I would like you to have a go at, I don't even need to, have a go at answering this question. You've got a multiple choice there. Where were the majority of British exports made in the 1600s, okay? Where were the majority of British exports made in the 1600s? A, African plantations. B, British factories. C, British agricultural fields. Or D, American and Caribbean plantations. Dun, 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 dun. It was B. Sorry, C. Now, it can't be African plantations because we don't actually have plantations in Africa. That is a misconception. We only have plantations in the Americas. British factories? No, because it was wool. Remember, wool was made in, wool isn't made in a factory, it's made from the agricultural field. It's actually taken off the sheep. Right, so now, what is the change? Where were the majority of British exports made in the 1700s? In the 1700s. Have a think. And what I'm actually asking here is percentage of money. So the really valuable ones, the really, really valuable ones. Okay. Well, because it was overall total, it's British factories, British agricultural fields, sorry. Because remember, we're still at 47% total, still at 40% total. Okay, now here you go. Now is the question. Where were the most valuable British exports made in the 1700s? Have a think. Okay, well, they're American Caribbean plantations because they were cotton, sugar, tobacco, and they were made on plantations by slaves. Dun, dun, dun. Now, some of the things that I really want to use to challenge us. I'll move my little face miles away over here. So, Navigation Acts 1660, 1663, and 1696. These are actually going to help explain how the empire benefits, because we've looked at how slave ships move from Europe to trade here and gain slaves or turn African people into slaves. We then move to the Americas to then force them to actually work. About 12 million people are forced. About 15% of those die. So then they're forced to work here, and we were going to look at how horrible it was to go there. And then they come back. But the British Empire is obviously a form of government, really. How do they benefit? Because if these are all private people moving between, well, they might just keep their money and the British Empire doesn't gain. But it does. One reason is the British government actually were investors. They were some other people actually paying people to go to do this, but they were expecting money in return. So an example of this is Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth I did this. She gave people like John Hawkins and Francis Drake money, and they engaged in slavery and piracy. Piracy is being a pirate, so capturing ships. But also, these acts, Navigation Act 1660, 1663, and 1696, basically said in the British Empire, the only trade to and from the colonies, mainly here, was to be carried in English ships. This therefore meant English people were benefiting more, becoming richer. If English people become richer, they had to pay tax. That tax went to the British government, therefore benefiting the empire. Also, they said the most valuable goods must be carried either directly, so straight away, to an English or colonial port. Colonial is a port in a colony. Colonial, colony, sounds similar, even if going to a foreign market. So, if you are carrying sugar, cotton, and tobacco, you have to take it either directly to England or through a British Empire port, even if you're going somewhere like Spain. The reason why was because then they could put something called a tariff on you. Tariff, T-A-R-I-F-F, tariff. Now, what that meant was they would force you to pay them money when you got there. So let's say you've got in your ship £1,000 worth of cotton. Well, you would have to pay them a certain amount of money. So it could be, for instance, £100. So it's like a tax. It's another way for the British government in the empire to benefit from the trade. The British Empire was obviously created to make money, to make people powerful. They were never going to let something like this happen, something like slavery, and not gain from it. Otherwise, what would be the point in the empire? So raise custom revenue was tax on trades. Tax on trades is like a tariff. Now, what I'd like you to do is put these in order to show the process of the Atlantic slave trade. How did it actually work? So it's obviously not A, B, C, D, E, because, well, I would not have put it in that order. So what order do you think it actually is? Okay, well, let's have a look, see if I put it there. No, I haven't. All right, so first off, they need to leave England, so C. Then they need to gain slaves or turn African people into slaves. So that's D, C, D. Then they need to sell them to plantations because you can't make cotton and sugar before you before you go to the plantations. So it's C, D, E, B, A. C, D, E, B, A. Okay, now, what extent was the British Empire built on slavery? Okay, have a read of this. Have a read of this. Pause it to give yourself a chance. Okay, the Centre for the Study of Legacies of British Slave Ownership at UCL, University College London. Create a vast database, massive place of information. Database is a place of information to show just how profoundly, how importantly slavery shaped Britain. So, among the institutions with a history of slavery connections are the Bank of England, High Street banks, RBS, Barclays, Lloyds, and these benefited from slavery. What they did was they invested money in slavery. So they gave slavers and slave owners and slave ships money to buy slaves, but they were forced to then give money back to the bank. So they made money, especially insurance companies. An insurance company would basically say, if your ship crashes or sinks, I will give you this much money, but you have to pay me this much money first. So these are some places that benefited, but also people got very, very rich. There were lots of rich people in Britain who benefited from slavery. And what they did is they donated some of that money to art galleries, to museums. So even museums benefited from slavery. This example is just to show you how much Britain actually benefited. Okay, and we have famous people today. So David Cameron, his family have had connections to slavery at some point, and so has Benedict Cumberbatch. Now, I'm obviously not blaming them for slavery. It's not their fault. Their family did it. But I'm just saying we still have important people today who benefited. Now, our question here is, to what extent was the British Empire built on slavery? Okay. Now, let's see if I can turn this on here. I'm going to see if I can stop my video here. Right, so question is, to what extent was the British Empire built on slavery? Let me get out of the light. I'll try and zoom this in for us. Now, what's the question saying? To what extent? This basically means how far. So is it on a scale of 1 to 10, is it 10 or is it 0? How far along is this? Is it a lot or a little? You have to decide. British Empire, what does the British Empire mean? Have a think. Slavery, what's slavery? Define those two keywords for me. Well, British Empire, when one country controls or owns another country. Slavery, when one person is owned and controlled by another. Built on, so built on, if I build a house, it's built on the ground, okay? So what looking at, how far is the British Empire built on slavery? In other words, how far did the British Empire benefit from slavery? But built on is more than that. It's basically, if you're built on it, it must be there for that to survive. You can't build a house on a cloud because it will fall straight through. So it must be built on slavery. That's what this is saying. Built on. To what extent was the British Empire built on slavery? Well, built means slavery must be there. It's something that's really, really important. If it's not really, really important, it's not built on, it's influenced by. So that's the difference. Now, I'm not going to give you too much help on this. I'm just going to give you a bit of help planning it. Now, there are two options here. You could do it in a slightly simple way. So I'm just going to put this simple. You could just say, yes, it is built. Give me some subject knowledge, a few reasons. So reasons. So it could be reason 1, reason 2, and some subject knowledge. A bit of subject knowledge. Then it could be no. Sorry, no, I'm moving this one. There could be no. Reason 1, subject knowledge, subject knowledge, subject knowledge. Reason 2, subject knowledge, subject knowledge, subject knowledge. And that could be an overall conclusion. Overall, I think, sorry. And give me a little bit of a conclusion. That's one way of doing it. It's good, it's effective. Or a much more complicated, more difficult, but much, 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 much more effective way is to do a more thematic way. Now, this involves building an argument throughout. Here you're just saying, this is an option, that's an option, that's an option, that's an option. Overall, I think this. This way, you are building your argument. You've got one brick, build on top of it, build on top of it, build on top of it. That's what we're doing here. So we could do it by looking at groups. or people. So what I'd do is I'd start with your introduction. Say what you think. Can't even write today. Say what you think. Okay, overall, how far do you actually think it was built on? Was it built on it? Was it influenced by it? Was it a little bit? Was it really, really impressively built on it? Then what I'd do is your paragraphs would be your groups. So it could be group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. So it could be, group 1 could be the investors. And then it could be saying how they benefited. Subject knowledge, subject knowledge, subject knowledge. Making sure, how does this benefit the empire? I'm going to circle this because this is going to be important. Then it could be next paragraph, subject knowledge, subject knowledge, subject knowledge, who it is, who plus how do they benefit. And then how does this benefit the empire? I'm going to circle this again because this is us building our answer. So again, it could be group 3. How do they benefit? That could be subject knowledge, subject knowledge, subject knowledge. How does it build the empire? Again, subject knowledge, subject knowledge. So make sure it's saying how do they benefit? Then how does this benefit the empire? So look, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. This is your argument. So what you're slowly doing is you're building on top of each other. Okay, these are going to be linked together. You're going to try and link these together by saying, because of investors, this means the empire is built on slavery because not only is the empire built on slavery because of the investors, it's also built because of this people, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you're building your argument all the way through. How, to what extent was the British Empire built on slavery? Okay, so you're building your argument all the way through. Okay, now, these are the options you've got. I'll leave that there. I know it's tricky because the visualizer doesn't quite extend all the way. Question is, to what extent was the British Empire built on slavery? Okay. Some keywords to include would be investors, profits, tax, tariff, slaves, plantations, navigation acts, cotton, tobacco, sugar, okay. Good luck. Off you go.